Hello, and welcome to episode 162 of My Circus, My Monkeys. Do you have a coworker or team member who frustrates you? More specifically, does the way they operate conflict so much with your strengths that it drives you right up to the edge? Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about what you can do to work better with those folks and decrease your frustration, possibly even anger, and be more productive. So stay tuned. Recently, a supervisor emailed me the following question. Do you have any, or can you tell me where, to find worksheets on how certain strengths can deal with others who are not their strengths? For example, I have restorative and communication in my top five. How do I deal with someone who has restorative as one of their lower strengths? And it drives me crazy because they just throw things out. Or someone who doesn't think communication is important and so just doesn't tell me anything. Names withheld to protect their lives. So, this is a common challenge because, as we've discussed many times, our talent themes color the way we see the world, including the way we think, feel, and behave. And those things are not necessarily the way other people think, feel, and behave. But even though you know this on some level, when you're in the moment, other people's perspectives, their talent themes, their ways of operating can just feel wrong. And I'm putting quotes around wrong. So let's talk about how we can navigate these situations so they're less frustrating and to ensure that your folks are doing what they need to do to be successful. Okay, so first, I want to separate this issue into personal versus professional slash supervisory. And I think this is important because personally, you or I may hate the way someone else approaches a situation or task, but often it's not really any of our business. And what I mean by that is the other person is just doing their job. And because it's not really the way we would do it, our spidey senses start tingling and we start judging that person. So, for example, I used to be annoyed that my coworker would spend what was, in my opinion, a ridiculous amount of time on developing and implementing the theme for summer orientation. To me, that was a colossal waste of time. And I knew, and I'm again putting quotes around knew here, I could do it better and faster. But ultimately, it wasn't my job or my business. And while I may have observed or felt like she had to rush to finish other parts of the program, it was always a success. So I was just judging how she went about it because it conflicted with the way I would have done it. I'll give you another example. My frequent listeners know that my number one talent theme is ideation. So I love creating and developing new programs or new ways to do or implement things. And I know I've mentioned this example before, but in our team meetings, I would be happy spending the entire time brainstorming. But Becky is an achiever. So whenever I'd come up with my first or second idea, she would jump in and start focusing on how we could get that idea accomplished. Again, how do we achieve it? Now, when I've mentioned this example in the past, it was from my perspective that I needed her to slow her roll because I wasn't done with my ideating, and her achiever was, in my opinion, being bossy. But from her perspective, I was wasting precious doing time by coming up with more ideas when we already had two perfectly good ones. So, who is right here? And again, I'm putting right in quotes. We were probably partially both right and partially wrong. Or even further, neither of us were right or wrong. It was just a different approach. But that is not really the point. The point is that We were both frustrated because we were doubling down on our own perspectives, our own talent themes, our own way of doing things. And before we learned about Clifton's strengths and how to use it to better communicate, that frustration just meant we were wasting our valuable energy being annoyed with and judging one another. Remember, you have a limited amount of energy each day, and it's very easy to waste it being annoyed with other people and how they do things. When you're focused on what people are or aren't doing that you would do, one of the first things you need to ask yourself is whether that's how you want to spend that energy. And pet peeves definitely fall under this category. Like our supervisor who wrote in and said a team member drives me crazy because they just throw things away. Sure, but what are they throwing away? And full disclosure, I didn't have a follow up conversation with this individual, but another person's pet peeve might very well be keeping everything and never throwing stuff away. Again, who's right? I don't know that anyone is necessarily. And again, I don't know exactly what this person is throwing away. If it's indeed valuable things that the department actually needs, then that could be a problem. But my point is, other people doing things differently can absolutely trigger one of your talent themes to get judgy and annoyed. But the question is, and where I want you to start, is whether you want to spend your valuable time and energy getting upset about something that may feel annoying or even, again, quote unquote, wrong, but ultimately doesn't impact you or the work that you're doing. Now, that's not to say you should let everything go and chalk it up to none of my business, because sometimes it is your business and it does impact you. Again, going back to the example with Becky and I, to get the best outcome, we need my solid ideas and for her to get them done. And it took us having discussions about what my process is to come to a solid strategic idea and her process about implementing them. And again, I've mentioned this in previous episodes. I was annoyed because she cut me off after one or two ideas, in part because, yeah, I wanted to spend the whole time brainstorming. But more importantly, because my process took more time than her achiever wanted to get going. But that didn't mean I felt we had come to the best idea that made the most sense for us to invest our time and energy in, hashtag ideation, hashtag strategic. So I needed to explain, again, have a conversation that I needed to spend a bit more time than her achiever thought was ideal to get to that point. And at the same time, I didn't get to spend as much time as I would like ideally to brainstorm because we needed time to both come up with the idea and to organize it and put things into action. Okay. Once we knew this about each other, we would absolutely still get triggered and even frustrated at times. But then we could step back and remember that our way alone didn't get us the best results. Again, this goes back to balancing the idea that the way we prefer to do something, because that's how we think, feel, and behave, isn't necessarily the best or only way to accomplish a goal or meet expectations. And this can absolutely be challenging, especially when you're super busy and feeling stressed. Because in your mind, you think, we don't have time for this nonsense. Do it the right way. We have to stop and remind ourselves that there's rarely a right way. And again, ask, is this how I want to spend my energy today? But what if you're the supervisor and the things your team members are doing or not doing are negatively impacting their success or their ability to meet expectations? If that is the case, you absolutely need to step in and coach that person. Now, again, I want to challenge you to start this process by taking a minute to assess whether this person's way of thinking, feeling, or behaving is actually keeping them from being successful, or if it just doesn't meet your story, your idea of what a good employee does or doesn't do. And I mention this because it is really easy to jump from that's annoying to you'll never be successful here if you keep doing fill in the blank. Okay. So the best way to do this is to keep the end in mind. What are these specific expectations or goals for this person or role that seem to be an issue? A great example of this kind of in play is from a supervisor that I coached a while ago who oversaw folks who worked with TRIO students. And the people they supervised, their job was to connect and build strong relationships with their assigned students. This supervisor had woo and was complaining that one of their team members just wasn't outgoing. They didn't hang out with the students. They didn't reach out. They weren't doing it the same way that she did and many other people on her team. And so the supervisor wanted to know how to get this employee out of her shell so she would mingle and network more, AKA be more like her. My challenge to her was to ask whether this person was building strong relationships with their students, but just not in the same way that she did. Because woos can absolutely be great at this, but also they can be overwhelming to some people. So you often need folks on your team who are not woos, who don't behave this way, who can create relationships in more subtle ways. And when I mentioned this, when I challenged her, she seemed confused at first and a little bit shocked, but then kind of absorbed this idea. So just because someone on your team isn't doing it the way you would do it, or some other folks on your team do it, doesn't necessarily mean they're not being effective. Okay. If you take the time to assess whether this person and their quote unquote annoying behavior is actually being successful, then it's time for you to let go of your bias. And again, easier said than done, but it's going to unnecessarily eat up your time and energy if you don't. And even worse, it might possibly make your relationship with a successful employee strained. But let's assume you've done that internal processing and the things that they are doing or not doing are, in fact, getting in the way of them being successful in their job, of achieving their goals, meeting expectations. So let's go back to our email. Or someone who doesn't think communication is important and just doesn't tell me anything. Communication is absolutely necessary to be an effective team. If you have communication as a top talent theme, like this supervisor does, then communicating is second nature to you. If you go and do something or think something, just naturally you think to yourself, ooh, I need to tell Brenda about this. She'll need to know so she can fill in the blank. But if you are a team member does not have communication or any of the talent themes that are communication forward, it just simply doesn't cross your mind or their mind to tell Brenda. If someone mentioned to you, or you mentioned to this team member, hey, don't you think Brenda would need to know this so she can, again, fill in the blank? And you'd probably go, oh my gosh, yes, that makes so much sense. But again, left to your own talent themes, left to their own talent themes, your brain just doesn't have that neural network set up. So you or they need to establish new habits that are aligned with achieving this expectation. And that's where you as a supervisor comes in. You need to be clear with your team what your expectations are and coach them to be better able to meet them. And sometimes You might not even be clear about what you expect because to you, it seems obvious. If you have communication, and I do have communication in my top 10, it is not top of mind for me to say to other people, hey, be sure you communicate with me, and this is what that looks like. I would never internally automatically think that because, duh, obviously we all need to communicate because that's the way I see the world. But remember, that's not the way everybody thinks. This is where performance management comes in, specifically setting those clear expectations, coaching, and holding folks accountable. And in this case, if you have a team member who is not communicating, you need to sit down and talk to them about it. And using a strengths based approach is a powerful way to do this because you're focusing on the expectations and asking them to reflect how their strengths, the things that they do best, can help them meet these expectations and how those things might be getting in their way of better communicating. So let's say this person supervises Becky from my earlier example. And again, Becky, her number one achiever. Well, there is a good chance that Becky is not communicating like the supervisor needs her to because she's so busy doing the things on her to-do list. For Becky, taking time out to communicate what she did may feel like she's no longer being productive. So you as a supervisor can help her reframe communication or communicating about XYZ as being things that are productive and necessary for the team. And in fact, that communication piece belongs on her to-do list. And so she can then use the very thing that was holding her back to be more successful communicating like you need her to. Now, I do want to caution you that this will probably take a few conversations to see the kind of change you want or need. Remember, everyone has these internal habits and systems that are often attached to our talent themes, and they have been fine-tuned for 20, 30 years at this point. And if you've spent that long not thinking about communicating when you do things, one conversation is not going to upgrade those systems. Your job as supervisor is to first help them understand why X, in this case, communicating, is so important to your department's or your student's success. Then your job is to help coach them so they can understand what might be getting in their way, how they can lean on other talents to help them, and to build new habits and or systems to make it happen within a reasonable time frame. Now, I mention reasonable time frame because this works both ways. You cannot expect folks to immediately upgrade their habits, and that's not because they are doing anything wrong, but because that's the way everybody's brain works. Remember from other episodes, your brain is running on autopilot 95 to 99% of the time. That's true for your team members as well. You've told their conscious brain that they need to upgrade their behavior around X. But their subconscious brain, which is running autopilot, is not going to get that message until a new habit is established. But we also want the time frame to be reasonable because if that team member isn't putting in any effort to change, or if unfortunately, no matter how hard they do try, they can't make the jump, then it's time to decide whether that person belongs in this position. And it's not something that most of us enjoy doing, but I've seen far too many supervisors try and try and try to help folks get where they need to be and still wonder and ask me, what are they doing wrong? What am I doing wrong as a supervisor? What else could I try? As long as you have given folks the coaching and opportunities to upgrade their habits to meet expectations within a reasonable time frame, you have done your job. They have got to meet you halfway. So, just to recap, when other folks' strengths, aka the way they think, feel, or behave, are getting under your skin, the first thing you need to do is to reflect on whether that thing that's frustrating you is an actual performance issue versus not the way you do it. And if it's just not the way you do it, you've got to decide whether it's worth getting bothered by it at all. And again, given you only get so much energy every day, ask yourself if getting worked up and using your valuable resource of energy just because they made a different decision than you would have is worth it. But if the point of frustration is holding you and your team back, it is time to have a discussion. If it's with a coworker, talk to that person about what you've noticed and how you think it's impacting the work, the goals, the expectations. Be open to their perspectives, including asking questions out of curiosity to better understand why they think, feel, and do the things that they do. If this is coming from a team member you supervise, get clear on your own expectations so you can clearly communicate what you need from them. Then coach them using a strengths based approach so they can identify which of their talent themes might be getting in their way and how those talent themes could help them upgrade their habits. Work with that team member to brainstorm ways to achieve the expectations you have and hold them accountable by either celebrating their success or having appropriate repercussions if they aren't making progress. But no matter what the situation is, continuing to be frustrated with the folks you work with or even live with just builds tension between you. Remember, every time you focus on the frustration over resolving the issue one way or another, you waste energy that could be going to accomplishing the other things you have on your plate. And until next time, stay strong.